Chapter 1: The New Vocabulary of the Self. We are living inside a silent, profound rewrite of the human script. The words we once reserved for the psychiatrist's couch, trauma, anxiety, narcissism, attachment have escaped. They now walk beside us in the supermarket, sit with us at family dinners, and whisper in our ears during sleepless nights. This is not merely a trend of awareness. It is a systemic migration of language from the realm of pathology to the realm of identity. We have traded one lexicon of the self for another. Where our grandparents might have spoken of a crisis of faith or a weakness of character, we now speak of unhealed wounds and maladaptive patterns. Where they sought forgiveness or fortitude, we seek diagnosis and coping mechanisms. This new vocabulary promises something powerful and seductive: legibility. It turns the chaotic, often terrifying weather of our inner lives into a map with legends, keys, and identifiable landmarks. A sudden rage is not just a confusing eruption. It's a trigger response pointing to past injury. A pattern of difficult relationships is not just bad luck, it's an anxious attachment style. The map makes the wilderness of the self feel navigable, even tameable. But a map is not the territory. And when we mistake the clinical labels for the full truth of our being, we risk shrinking the vast, messy, and magnificent landscape of a human life into the sterile corridors of a diagnostic manual. The system of therapeutic language offers clarity, but it exacts a tax on ambiguity, on mystery, and on the simple, unanalyzed experience of being. To understand how this happens, we must look not at the individual, but at the ecosystem of meaning we all now inhabit. Language is not a passive tool, it is an active architect of reality. When a society adopts a new primary vocabulary for the self, it inevitably begins to sort all human experience through that new filter. This is the hallmark of a robust system. It becomes invisible, the water we swim in. We see this process clearly in history. In theological systems, human suffering was framed through the language of sin, penance, and redemption. In the industrial age, it was often framed through the language of efficiency, utility, and productivity. Now, in the therapeutic age, our suffering, and indeed, our entire identity is increasingly framed through the language of health and sickness, functionality and dysfunction. The rise of this language is not an accident. It fills a vacuum left by receding religious and communal structures, offering a new, science-adjacent framework for making sense of pain and purpose. It democratizes insights that were once locked away in academic journals. But this democratization comes with a subtle, pervasive pressure. If a concept exists to explain dysfunction, and we are encouraged to see our lives through that lens, then the default mode of being becomes one of vigilant self-assessment. The quiet, unexamined moment becomes suspect. A simple bad mood is no longer just a passing cloud, it is data. It is a symptom waiting for a cause, a clue in the ongoing mystery of what's wrong with me. The system, in its benevolent intent to heal, can inadvertently teach us that to be human is to be a patient in waiting, and that a life well lived is a life perpetually under therapeutic review. This transition from using language to being used by it is a personal journey that feels, in the moment, like nothing but progress. It begins with a powerful, often liberating, moment of recognition. Consider the story of Sam, a graphic designer in his late 30s. For most of his life, Sam operated with a kind of frantic, high-octane intensity. He described himself as passionate, a perfectionist, someone who feels things deeply. His relationships were dramatic, his work cycles were bouts of manic inspiration followed by crushing burnout, and his inner world was a storm of high highs and low lows. To his friends, he was just a lot. To himself, he was a puzzle he could never solve, a collection of flaws he tried to outrun through achievement and charisma. Then, during a particularly devastating breakup, a close friend gently suggested he might recognize himself in descriptions of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, a term finding its way from clinical circles into the public discourse. Curious and desperate, Sam fell down a rabbit hole of articles, forums, and memoirs. The effect was not gradual, it was seismic. It was like someone finally turned on the lights. he recalled, his voice still carrying the awe of that moment years later. Every confusing piece of my life, the hypervigilance, like I was always waiting for a disaster, the emotional flashbacks where a small criticism would make me feel like a worthless child again. The inability to trust people even when they showed me kindness. It wasn't a moral failing. It wasn't just my personality. It was a set of symptoms. It had a name. This naming was an act of profound salvation. It lifted a burden of shame he had carried since childhood. He wasn't broken. He was injured. There was a logic to his pain, and with logic came the possibility of a path. He found a therapist specializing in trauma, joined online communities, and began the deliberate work of healing. The language gave him a story where before there had only been chaos. But systems have a way of extending their reach beyond the problem they were meant to solve. As the months passed, Sam noticed a subtle shift. The diagnostic lens that had brought such clarity to his past began to automatically click into place over his present. Every new person he met was subconsciously assessed for their potential to be toxic or re-traumatizing. A passing comment from his boss wasn't just feedback. It was analyzed for microaggressions and power dynamics. A low mood wasn't a normal human response to a gray Tuesday. It was a depressive episode that needed to be managed with techniques. The framework that had liberated him from a prison of confusion was now constructing a new, highly secure facility. Its walls were made of definitions, its rooms were categories, and the windows looked out only onto landscapes he already had a name for. He had begun to experience his life primarily as a manifestation of his diagnosis. The vibrant, unpredictable, sometimes painful man was slowly being eclipsed by the survivor with CPTSD. The identity had become a filter, and the filter was coloring everything. One evening, watching a movie with a friend, he realized he was no longer simply experiencing the film. He was diagnosing the character's attachment styles. In that moment, he felt a pang of loss for the simpler, if more confused, person who could just get lost in a story. Sam's story is not unique. It is a template for a modern rite of passage. We see it in the person who learns about boundaries and, with the best intentions, begins to treat every request from a loved one as a potential violation to be policed. We see it in the person who discovers the concept of emotional labor and starts auditing their relationships with a spreadsheet of fairness. The language gives us power, but it also scripts our interactions. It provides a shield, but the weight of constantly holding it up can become its own exhaustion. We exchange the raw, risky, and messy work of human connection for the safer, more sterile process of relational management. The system promises to protect us from harm, but it can also wall us off from the very spontaneity and vulnerability that makes connection meaningful. So, what is the way forward? How do we use this powerful language without being consumed by it? The answer is not to reject the insights of psychology, which for many are genuinely life-saving. Nor is it to plunge back into unexamined suffering. The answer lies in developing a conscious, flexible relationship with the language itself. It lies in remembering that we are not just the subject of the system, we are also its observer. We must learn to hold these words as useful tools, not absolute truths, as one dialect in the rich and varied language of being human, not the mother tongue. This begins with a practice of gentle, curious observation. For the next week, I invite you to become an anthropologist of your own speech. Carry a small notebook or use a note on your phone. Your task is not to change what you say, but to notice it. Pay particular attention to moments of emotional description or personal explanation. When you say, "I'm so anxious about this," write it down. When you think, "He's such a narcissist," make a note. When you explain your need for space as enforcing a boundary, observe the term. Don't judge yourself. You are collecting data on the architecture of your perception. At the end of the week, sit with your list. Look at it not as a record of your reality, but as a record of the frame through which you are viewing your reality. Each of these terms, anxious, triggered, narcissistic, boundary, is a powerful, pre-packaged story. They come with assumptions, causes, and implied solutions. Now, try a simple exercise of translation. Take 3 of the most frequent or charged terms on your list. For each one, attempt to translate the feeling or situation it describes into a language that has nothing to do with therapy. Describe it as a poet might, or a novelist, or a physicist, or your wise, non-therapized grandmother. For example, instead of, I had an anxiety attack, you might try, my heart became a bird trapped in my ribs, and the world narrowed to a single, too bright point of dread. Or more simply, I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting still. Instead of, that meeting was triggering, you might say, the tone of his voice scraped against an old scar I'd forgotten was there. Or, it brought back a memory I thought I'd buried, and the room suddenly felt much smaller. Instead of, I need to set a boundary, you might experiment with, I need to build a small fence here so my garden can grow. Or, if I say yes to this, I will disappear. I need to say no to remain myself. The goal of this translation is not to find better words, it is to break the automatic circuit between experience and clinical label. It is to create a moment of space, a gap in the system's processing, where you can meet your own experience fresh. In that gap, you might discover that some of the pain is the label itself, the pressure to constantly be diagnosing and fixing. You are reminding your inner world that it is allowed to be vast, ambiguous, and unexplainable. You are a forest, not a spreadsheet, an ocean, not a chart. The therapeutic map is invaluable for navigating certain treacherous terrains, but you must never mistake its clean lines for the wild, beautiful, and untamed truth of your own existence. The first step to freedom within any system is to realize you are the one holding the map, and you are free to look up, look around, and see the actual territory with your own eyes. Chapter 2. The Productivity of Healing, the Self-Help Economy. There is a new kind of hunger in the modern world, a quiet, gnawing sense that we are not yet who we are supposed to be. We are told we are not resilient enough, not mindful enough, not emotionally intelligent enough, not optimized. This hunger did not emerge from a vacuum. It is the carefully cultivated product of the most personal of industries, the economy of self-help. We have entered an era where the inner life, once the realm of philosophers and poets, has been quantified, metricized, and packaged for consumption. This system no longer just sells us solutions to our pain, it sells us the tools to measure the ever-widening gap between our current and our potential selves. It has taken the noble, ancient quest for wisdom and self-understanding and recast it as a form of productivity. Your peace of mind, your emotional stability, your very happiness have become key performance indicators in the startup of you. The goal is no longer to be, but to endlessly become a state of permanent, profitable becoming where arrival is always just one more course, one more app, one more protocol away. The self-help economy thrives not on our misery, but on a more subtle and renewable resource, our pervasive, low-grade dissatisfaction with the perfectly ordinary human we are today. To understand this system, we must follow the money not just of dollars, but of attention and intention. The self-help industry, valued in the hundreds of billions, is a masterclass in demand creation. It does not merely respond to existing suffering, it actively defines new categories of lack. Yesterday's melancholy is today's dysthemia, requiring a specific meditation technique. A normal reaction to stress becomes adrenal fatigue in need of a supplement regimen and lifestyle overhaul. The language of optimization, borrowed from Silicon Valley and corporate management, has infiltrated the sanctuary of the soul. We speak of biohacking, our sleep, engineering, our morning routine, and running experiments on our own psychology. The underlying message is relentless. You are a system of levers and pulleys, and with the right inputs, the right knowledge, purchased from the right expert, you can achieve peak human performance. This framing transforms the messy, nonlinear journey of a human life into a linear project with milestones, deliverables, and, inevitably, a sense of failure when the project falls behind schedule. The system's genius is that it co-opts the language of empowerment. It tells you that you are the CEO of your own life, obscuring the fact that you are also its primary laborer, working double shifts on an internal assembly line that never closes, producing a product, a better you that is perpetually unfinished. This pressure to optimize is rarely experienced as coercion. It feels, initially, like taking the reins. It feels like agency. Maya's story is a textbook case. A high-level software engineer, she was no stranger to systems, metrics, and iterative improvement. After a period of burnout that left her feeling hollow and cynical, she decided to apply her professional skills to her own recovery. She didn't just want to feel better, she wanted to solve her burnout. She downloaded a suite of apps, one for tracking her mood with a daily slider from devastated to ecstatic, another for logging her meditation minutes, a third that gamified her water intake and sleep cycles with achievement badges. She bought journals with prompts for gratitude accounting and negative thought audits. She subscribed to newsletters promising science-backed protocols for resilience. For the first 3 months, it was incredible, she said, her voice still carrying a trace of that initial zeal. I had data. My sleep score was improving. My mindfulness streak was 87 days long. I could see a graph of my mood trending upward. I was treating my mind like a complex piece of software, and I was debugging it. I felt in control. She had transformed her inner chaos into a dashboard of clean, actionable metrics. The system rewarded her with dopamine hits of completion streaks maintained, goals met, journals filled. Her recovery had all the satisfying structure of a quarterly business review. But systems, especially those modeled on corporate productivity, have a way of turning on their creators. The turning point came on a day when a family visit went poorly. She felt irritated, drained, and sad normal human emotions in response to a complex social interaction. Yet, as she went to log her evening mood, her hand froze over the slider. A wave of shame washed over her. If she marked herself down, she would break her upward trend. The pristine graph would be marred by an ugly dip. Her emotional agility score would plummet. In that moment, she confessed, I wasn't worried about my actual feelings, I was worried about my data. The tools meant to serve her awareness had become the masters of her experience. The pursuit of wellness had become another performance, subject to its own ruthless audit. She was exhausted, not from living, but from the relentless administrative duty of managing her own humanity. She had escaped the tyranny of her corporate KPIs only to install a more intimate, inescapable set within her own psyche. The self-help economy had not healed her burnout. It had simply provided a new, more psychologically sophisticated arena in which to burn out. Maya's experience reveals the central paradox of the optimization mindset. It seeks to eliminate suffering by making the self perfectly efficient, but in doing so, it pathologizes the inherent inefficiencies of being human. Grief, with its non-linear waves, becomes a setback. A period of creative stagnation becomes a productivity failure. The need for rest becomes a system breakdown. The language of the system cannot accommodate valleys, only obstacles to be overcome on the path to a higher peak. This creates a peculiar form of loneliness, where one feels guilty for experiences that fall outside the approved metrics of growth. The community found in self-help forums often reinforces this, becoming a place to compare scores and protocols rather than to share unvarnished, unoptimized human stories. The economy sells connection, but it often delivers a new kind of isolation. The isolation of being perpetually under construction, never quite fit for habitation. So, how do you step off this treadmill without feeling like you're abandoning your own progress? The solution is not to smash your meditation app or burn your journal. It is to introduce what we might call strategic inefficiency. You must hack the system of optimization by deliberately breaking its rules. Your goal is to create a small, protected space where your worth is not measured, tracked, or graphed. This week, choose one metric you currently track about yourself: your mood, your steps, your screen time, your meditation minutes. For 7 days, you are going to deliberately and conscientiously not track it. Do not open the app. Do not fill in the journal column. If you meditate, do it and let it be an unrecorded event in the history of your consciousness. Your only task is to notice what happens. You will likely feel a low-grade anxiety, a sense of incompletion, as if you are failing a duty to yourself. This anxiety is the system's fingerprint. it is the signal of its hold on you. It proves that your peace has become conditional on your performance data. When the urge to check or log arises, don't fight it. Simply say to yourself, this feeling is the metric talking. My value exists without it. Then, engage in a restorative activity with the explicit, even defiant goal of letting it count for nothing. Take a walk without a step counter, listen to an album from start to finish without multitasking. Sit and stare out a window for 10 minutes. Do not turn it into a mindfulness practice. Do not extract a lesson from it. Let it be an unmeasured, unoptimized, unproductive gap in the system's data stream. In that gap, you might rediscover a simple, uncommodified pleasure. You might remember what it feels like to do something not for the graph it produces, but for the experience it contains. This small rebellion is not about laziness. It is about sovereignty. It is a declaration that you are more than the sum of your quantified parts. You are reclaiming a piece of your interiority from the marketplace of improvement. You are remembering that a forest is not measured by its board feet of lumber, and an ocean is not valued by its gallons of water. You are that forest. You are that ocean. Wild, deep, and valuable not for what you produce, but for your sheer, unoptimized existence. The economy of self-help will always sell you the next upgrade. Your freedom lies in discovering the parts of yourself that are already, and will always be, pricelessly complete. Chapter 3. The Therapeutic Script. Rewriting Friendship, Love, and Conflict. We are in the midst of a quiet revolution in how we connect, one conversation at a time. The language of the therapist's office, once a private dialect for unpacking pain, has become the new shared script for friendship, love, and even passing interactions. Words like boundaries, toxic, accountability, and safe space are no longer clinical terms. They are the new rules of engagement. This script offers a powerful promise that we can engineer healthier relationships by applying rational principles to the irrational heart. It proposes that with enough communication, enough clarity, and enough enforcement of personal rules, we can minimize hurt and maximize mutual fulfillment. On the surface, this is an ethos of care and respect. But when this script is followed too literally, when the messy, intuitive dance of human connection is replaced by a series of managed protocols, something vital can be lost. Relationships risk becoming sterile projects of mutual therapy, where partners and friends become de facto clinicians for each other, and every misunderstanding is treated as a violation of code rather than an inevitable friction of two unique souls brushing against each other. The therapeutic script provides a superb framework for ending what is clearly destructive. Its limitation emerges when we try to use it to build what is meant to be wild, spontaneous, and beautifully unpredictable. This script functions as a new social operating system, and like any OS, it runs in the background, shaping all our interactions. To see it, look at the changed landscape of conflict. A generation ago, a friend who canceled plans might have been called flaky or inconsiderate. Today, we are more likely to diagnose, they have poor boundaries, or that's not respecting my time. The shift is subtle but seismic. The first is a judgment of character within a shared, imperfect social contract. The second is an assessment of psychological hygiene and a potential infringement of a personal rule. The script moves us from the realm of manners and reciprocity into the realm of mental health and personal jurisdiction. This has an emancipatory power. It gives people, especially those who have felt powerless, a language to articulate and defend against genuine harm. It has democratized the concept of self-respect. But systems have a tendency to expand their domain. When every minor irritation is framed through the lens of boundaries, the concept itself becomes diluted. When every difficult person is labeled toxic, we may avoid the necessary gritty work of navigating complexity and practicing forgiveness for ordinary human flaws. The script, designed to protect our peace, can sometimes build a perimeter so secure that nothing challenging and therefore nothing that could truly deepen us can get in. It can mistake the inevitable storms of intimacy for systemic failures, prompting a premature evacuation when what is needed is to learn to sail in rough weather. This scripting of relationships feels, in the beginning, like finally being handed a user manual for a machine you've been fumbling with in the dark. Take the story of Leo and his closest friend, Mark. Their friendship, forged in college, was classic and deep, a bond built on shared history, inside jokes, and unwavering loyalty. But it was also messy. They could go months without talking when life got busy. Their arguments, though rare, were volcanic, filled with harsh words and wounded silences that sometimes took weeks to thaw. They always reconciled with a gruff, "You're still an idiot," that meant, "I love you." After a particularly painful fallout in their early 30s, Leo, who had recently begun therapy, decided things had to change. He approached the repair not with their old unspoken understanding, but with a new toolkit. He asked Mark for a structured conversation to process what happened. He used "I feel" statements meticulously. He explained that Mark's tendency to withdraw during conflict was a trigger for his abandonment fears and asked him to work on providing verbal reassurance. Mark, bewildered but willing, tried to play along. For a while, it worked. Their conversations became calmer, more polite. They scheduled check-ins. They acknowledged each other's needs. It felt mature, Leo recalled. Like we were finally adults. We had a system. But over time, a strange emptiness seeped in. The explosive fights were gone, but so was the electric, joyful banter. The deep, wordless understanding was replaced by careful, slightly stilted dialogue. Their friendship began to feel like a well-managed partnership, a small nonprofit they were running together. The spontaneity, the late-night, slightly drunk phone calls, the impulsive, terrible decisions that became legendary stories dried up. It was as if in scripting their conflict resolution, they had accidentally scripted out their connection's soul. The crisis point came when Mark's father died. Leo, following the script, immediately offered, "I'm here for you. What do you need? Do you want to talk about your feelings?" Mark, raw and grieving, looked at him with tears in his eyes and said, "Leo, I don't need you to be my therapist. I just need you to be my friend. Sit with me, watch a dumb movie. Tell me an old story about us. Just be here." In that moment, Leo saw the trap. He had been so focused on managing their dynamic correctly, on providing the right kind of support, that he had forgotten how to simply be with his friend in unscripted, imperfect silence and shared presence. The therapeutic script, designed to facilitate closeness, had become a barrier to it. They had gained conflict resolution skills, but were losing the art of friendship itself. Leo and Mark's story illuminates a central tension in the therapeutic reshaping of relationships. The script excels at creating safety and structure, which are essential foundations. But the deepest magic of human connection, the laughter that cracks you open, the comfort of silence that needs no explanation, the forgiveness offered before it's asked for, often exists in the unstructured space between the rules. When we over-apply the script, we risk turning our loved ones into case studies and ourselves into constant clinicians. We audit the relationship for fairness and psychological safety, but we may stop allowing it to be silly, boring, irrational, or gloriously inefficient. Love and friendship are not just projects to be managed, they are ecosystems to be inhabited, with all their unpredictable weather. So, how do you use the wisdom of this new script without letting it rewrite the entire play of your relationships? The answer lies in cultivating discernment, the ability to tell the difference between a genuine red flag and a simple human flaw, between a boundary that protects your core and a rule that isolates you from life's necessary friction. This week, practice and exercise in contextual language. Choose one close relationship. For 1 week, impose a gentle moratorium on using primary therapeutic terms: boundary, toxic, trigger, accountable, process within it. When a situation arises where you would normally reach for one of these words, challenge yourself to describe what you feel or need using a different, more specific vocabulary. For example, instead of saying, "I need to set a boundary," try, "When you do X, it makes me feel Y, and I have a hard time being present. Could we try Z instead?" This moves from erecting a unilateral wall to inviting collaboration. Instead of thinking this dynamic is toxic, ask yourself, is this chronically harmful, or is it just hard right now? Is this person causing damage, or are we just struggling to understand each other? This replaces a final verdict with an open inquiry. Instead of saying, "That triggered me," Experiment with, that brought up a really old, sharp feeling for me. It's about my past, but it got touched today. This takes ownership of the reaction without making the other person responsible for your entire emotional history. The goal is not to abandon crucial concepts of self-protection. It is to prevent them from becoming lazy shorthand that stops real conversation. By forcing yourself to use more nuanced, personalized language, you reconnect with the unique texture of the relationship in front of you rather than filtering it through a generic system. You move from managing a case to tending a connection. Finally, reintroduce an element of scriptless interaction. With this person, do something that has no goal of connection, communication, or growth. Don't talk about the relationship. Don't analyze it. Simply share an experience. Cook a meal side by side without deep conversation. Watch a comedy. Work on a physical task like building something or gardening. Let the interaction be defined by the shared focus outside of yourselves, not by the internal dynamics between you. In that space, you may rediscover the unmediated, wordless bond that existed before you both learned the script, the part of your connection that is not a system to be optimized, but a mystery to be enjoyed. Chapter 4. The Unhealed Healer. When growth becomes a loop. We have built an altar to a new God, the God of healing. We speak of our healing journey with solemn reverence, track our healing milestones, and consume content promising faster, more profound healing. To be on this path is to be virtuous, enlightened, and responsible. To question its endpoint, however, is heresy. But what if the destination is a mirage? What if healing, as it's been culturally constructed, is not a place you arrive at, but a horizon that forever recedes as you walk? This is the subtle trap of the therapeutic system. It can seamlessly mutate the goal of relief into the engine of perpetual self-scrutiny. The system, designed to alleviate suffering by understanding its roots, can inadvertently teach us that we are fundamentally made of those roots. The quest to fully process every past wound, to integrate every traumatic memory, and to achieve a state of flawless psychological hygiene becomes a lifelong excavation project where peace is always buried in the next layer of soil. You become an archaeologist of your own pain, and the digging never stops because the definition of fully healed is a moving target, expertly recalibrated by the next book, the next expert, the next layer of uncovered memory. In this system, the state of being unhealed is not a temporary condition, it is the primary, sustainable identity. And the industry that surrounds it thrives not on your completion, but on your continued, devoted enrollment in the curriculum of your own brokenness. To understand this loop, we must examine the unspoken assumption at its core. The idea that a human being can, and should, be restored to a pristine, pre-trauma state, or upgraded to a state beyond trauma altogether. This is a fundamentally engineering mindset applied to the soul. It assumes there is a blueprint for a correctly functioning self, and any deviation is a bug to be fixed. But a human life is not a corrupted file to be restored from a backup. It is a story. A scar is not just evidence of a wound. It is also evidence of survival, a testament to the body's incredible ability to knit itself back together, even if differently. The therapeutic system, in its zeal to cure, often pathologizes the scar itself. It encourages us to not just learn from our past, but to reverse its effects to somehow become the person we would have been if the bad thing had never happened. This is an impossible, heartbreaking task. The pursuit of it leads to a deep, chronic sense of failure, because the goal is a phantom. Every step forward reveals 3 more steps to take. Every resolved issue uncovers a deeper layer. The finish line is always just around the corner, in the next therapy breakthrough, the next workshop, the next year of dedicated self-work. The system, promising liberation, can become the most elegant of prisons, one where the walls are made of your own best intentions to get better. This loop feels, for a long time, like dedication. It feels like courage. Elena's story is a masterclass in the loop. A survivor of a tumultuous childhood, she came to therapy in her late 20s, a decision that undoubtedly saved her life. It gave her language for the chaos, tools to manage her anxiety, and the first glimpses of self-compassion. She was a star patient, introspective, committed, hardworking. She did the work. She journaled. She challenged cognitive distortions. She processed memories. She felt progress. She left an abusive relationship, set boundaries with her family, and built a stable career. By all standard metrics, she had healed. But the goalposts moved. Stability felt like stagnation. Once the acute crises were managed, her focus turned to subtler textures. Why did she still feel a faint emptiness after social gatherings? Why did certain tones of voice still cause a micro-clench in her jaw? Her therapy evolved from crisis management to deep excavation. "It's like we cleaned up the wreckage of the earthquake," she said. "And now we're using tweezers to find every last speck of dust under the floorboards." She read books on ancestral trauma and wondered which patterns were hers and which were inherited ghosts. She explored spirituality to heal her inner child, then somatic therapy to heal the trauma stored in her body. The project of Elena became infinite. There was always a deeper, more archaic wound to uncover. The moment of recognition came not in a collapse, but in a moment of mundane joy. She was on a weekend hike, alone. The sun was dappled through the trees, the path was soft underfoot, and for a full 20 minutes she realized she had been simply walking. Not thinking, not analyzing, not being present as a practice, just walking. The sensation was so foreign it startled her. Her immediate, trained response was to turn this joy into material. "This is so peaceful. I should journal about this feeling. Why don't I feel this more often? What in my childhood blocked my ability to feel simple joy?" The analytical machinery, the healing mindset, had sprung to life to metabolize the unmediated experience. In that moment, she saw the loop with devastating clarity. Her pursuit of healing had become so total that it risked consuming every spontaneous spark of life, turning it into fuel for the never-ending project of self-improvement. She was no longer living her life. She was perpetually in recovery from it. The system had promised to return her to herself, but it had instead made her a full-time custodian of her own museum of pain. She was free from her past, but not free to her present. Elena's experience reveals the central paradox of the healing imperative. It can create a new kind of suffering, the suffering of never being quite healed enough. It fosters a hyper-vigilance toward one's own interior state, where a neutral or low mood isn't just a passing cloud, it's a relapse, a sign that the work is insufficient. This creates a profound isolation, as one feels perpetually under construction, and thus, in some fundamental way, unfit for genuine, uncomplicated connection. Friends become unofficial therapists, joy becomes a data point, peace becomes a KPI. The language of healing, once a lifeline, becomes the only language you speak, rendering the ordinary, unanalyzed poetry of human existence unintelligible. So, how do you step off the treadmill of infinite healing without feeling you're abandoning yourself to dysfunction? The answer is not to stop healing, but to radically redefine what healing looks like. It is to shift the goal from the eradication of wounding to the cultivation of a life worth living alongside it. This begins with a practice of declaring a moratorium on depth. For 1 week, consciously redirect your attention from the roots of your feelings to their branches. When you notice a difficult emotion, sadness, irritation, envy, resist the powerful urge to ask, "Why do I feel this? What trauma does this connect to?" Instead, ask a radically different set of questions. What does this feeling want me to do? Does it want me to rest? To create something? To reach out to someone? To change a situation? And most importantly, can I let this feeling be here just as it is, without making it mean anything profound about my worth or my progress? For example, if you feel a wave of social anxiety, the healing loop asks, what childhood rejection is this triggering? Is this my insecure attachment style? I need to process this. The alternative asks, this anxiety is here. It's uncomfortable. Can I simply let it hum in my body while I still choose to speak? Or, does it need me to politely excuse myself for some air? What is the next, small, functional action? You are moving from archaeology to architecture, from digging into the past to building in the present. Finally, practice one act of unanalyzable living. Do something simple, pleasurable, and slightly frivolous with the explicit intention of not learning from it. Go see a silly movie. Dance to a pop song in your kitchen. Buy a pastry just because it looks good. During and after, actively refuse to turn it into therapy. Don't search for your inner child. Don't evaluate if it sparked joy. Just let it be an experience that exists outside the narrative of your healing. Its only purpose is to be enjoyed, then to be over. In that small space, you reclaim a fragment of your life from the therapeutic narrative. You are not a project to be completed. You are a person to be lived. Healing is not about becoming unscarred. It is about learning to stop picking at the scar so you can finally use your hands to build, to touch, and to hold the world outside yourself. The loop breaks not when you find the final answer, but when you finally, courageously, allow yourself to stop asking the question. Chapter 5. The Therapeutic Reality. Rewriting the Rules of the World. We step out of our homes and into a world that is increasingly speaking in a new dialect. It's in the HR seminar that labels a demanding boss as creating a toxic work environment. It's in the parenting blog that advises managing a toddler's tantrum with emotion co-regulation. It's in the friend who ends a relationship because their needs weren't held in a safe container. This is more than personal growth. This is the construction of a therapeutic reality. The core assumptions of psychology that behavior has underlying causes, that past pain shapes present actions, that environments must be safe for growth are no longer confined to the self. They have become the new foundational principles for redesigning work, education, family, and community. This reality promises a more empathetic, accountable, and psychologically attuned world. But when the logic of the clinic becomes the logic of the commons, a subtle shift occurs. Social spaces begin to feel less like messy playgrounds of human interaction and more like managed therapeutic settings. Spontaneity is viewed with suspicion as a potential trigger. Natural hierarchies of skill and experience are flattened under the label of power dynamics. Conflict is not something to be navigated and resolved, but a dysfunction to be root-caused and eliminated. We are building a world optimized for psychological safety, but we must ask, at what cost to intellectual risk, robust debate, and the kind of friction that generates heat, light, and genuine innovation? This therapeutic reality functions as a new cultural operating system, running silently beneath the apps of our daily lives. Its most powerful feature is its ability to recategorize. Actions once seen as rude, competitive, or passionate are now reframed through a diagnostic lens. A strict teacher is no longer just disciplined, they are emotionally abusive or traumatizing. A colleague's sharp critique is not merely blunt feedback, it's a microaggression or an act of psychological violence. This recategorization is potent. It names genuine harms that were previously tolerated or ignored, giving victims a powerful vocabulary for justice. Yet, when applied too broadly, it can medicalize ordinary human disagreeableness. It can encourage a stance of hypervigilance, where we are taught to scan our environments not for opportunities or ideas, but for potential psychic threats. The workplace becomes a minefield of potential harm, school a sterile bubble meant to prevent all distress. The goal shifts from excellence and discovery to the prevention of all psychological discomfort. In this reality, resilience is not built through overcoming manageable challenges. It is presumed to exist only in a perfectly curated environment. The system, designed to protect the vulnerable, may inadvertently infantilize everyone, creating adults exquisitely sensitive to perturbation but poorly equipped to handle the inherent and necessary rough and tumble of life. For Clara, a mid-level manager at a progressive tech company, this new reality felt, at first, like a long overdue upgrade. Her company had replaced standard performance reviews with holistic growth conversations. Mandatory training sessions on calling out microaggressions and maintaining brave spaces were commonplace. Disagreements in meetings were gently paused with phrases like, "I'm sensing some tension. Let's circle back when we're all regulated." It felt civilized, Clara recalled. Like we had finally evolved past the dog-eat-dog pettiness of old corporate culture. We were caring for the whole person. But a creeping sense of inertia and anxiety began to permeate her team. The drive for psychological safety morphed into a paralyzing fear of causing any offense. Giving direct critical feedback became a fraught, hours-long process of crafting the perfect I feel statement and scheduling a soft launch conversation. Ambitious projects were sanded down to bland consensus, as any strong, dissenting opinion was viewed as disrupting the team's psychological safety. Innovation stalled. The most talented people grew frustrated and left, whispering on their way out about the culture of therapy that had replaced a culture of building. Clara found herself spending more time mediating perceived emotional injuries and facilitating repair sessions than on actual work. The crisis arrived during a product launch. A junior employee, Zoe, had made a significant error in the code. Clara's senior engineer, David, a brilliant but direct man in his 50s, discovered it. Frustrated by the tight deadline, he stormed over to Zoe's desk and said, loud enough for the team to hear, "Zoe, this is a rookie mistake. You've just set us back 2 days. What happened?" Zoe burst into tears and left the room. An hour later, Clara was summoned by HR. Zoe had filed a complaint, stating David had publicly shamed her, creating a hostile work environment that triggered her anxiety. The focus of the emergency meeting was not the code error, the missed deadline, or how to fix the problem. It was exclusively on David's harmful behavior, his lack of emotional intelligence, and the toxic dynamic he had created. David, bewildered, argued he had given necessary, urgent feedback. The system, however, was not designed to evaluate the accuracy or necessity of the feedback, only its psychological impact. He was placed on a corrective action plan requiring him to attend emotional intelligence coaching. The bug was fixed quietly, the deadline was missed, and a chilling silence fell over the engineering team. No one dared criticize anyone again. Clara sat at her desk that night, realizing her team was now the safest, most supportive, and most utterly ineffective group she had ever led. The therapeutic reality had achieved its goal. It had eliminated overt conflict. But in doing so, it had also eliminated the candor, accountability, and intellectual friction required to do anything hard. Clara's story illustrates the core tension of exporting the therapeutic frame to the public sphere. The values of the clinic, unconditional positive regard, non-judgmental listening, the primacy of emotional experience are essential for healing. But they are often antithetical to the values required for excellence, discovery, and governance, judgment, debate, hierarchy of skill, and the subordination of personal feelings to a shared mission. A world run as a therapy group is a world that may become very kind and very stuck. So, how do you navigate this therapeutic reality without becoming a cynical rebel or a fragile conformist? The skill required is contextual intelligence, the ability to discern which framework to apply and when. Is this a situation that calls for therapeutic care or for practical problem solving? Is this a moment for emotional processing or for decisive action? Begin with a simple reality audit. For 1 week, observe the public spaces you inhabit: your workplace, social media groups, community meetings. Listen not for the content of conversations, but for their underlying framework. How often are interpersonal issues framed in therapeutic language, unsafe, triggered, toxic? How often are practical problems recategorized as psychological ones? Don't judge, just map the terrain. Then, practice code switching. This is the conscious ability to move between different linguistic and behavioral frameworks. When a colleague wants to process their feelings about a project setback, you can engage the therapeutic framework. Listen empathetically, validate, ask how they're feeling. But if that same colleague is in a project meeting and the task is to solve the problem, you must be able to switch to a practical, goal-oriented framework. Okay, that happened. What's the fix? What's the next action? Who's responsible? The key is to be explicit and intentional about the switch. You might say, I hear this was really stressful, and we can talk more about that supportively later. For right now, in this meeting, let's focus on the solution path forward. Finally, champion robustness over fragility. This doesn't mean being cruel or dismissive. It means deliberately creating small, controlled doses of the old-world friction that builds anti-fragility. In your teams or friendships, you can model this by depersonalizing disagreement. Let's battle it out with the ideas, not the people. My critique is of your proposal, not of you. Separating impact from intent. I know you didn't mean to, but the effect of what you said was X. Can we focus on the effect? Normalizing repair. We're going to step on each other's toes sometimes. Let's make our apologies quick, specific, and then get back to work. The goal is not to dismantle the therapeutic reality, which has brought vital progress. The goal is to prevent it from becoming a totalizing monopoly on human interaction. We need both the sanctuary of the therapy room and the vigorous, demanding arena of the world. A healthy life and a healthy society requires the wisdom to know which room you're in and the courage to act accordingly. Your freedom lies in being bilingual fluent in the language of feelings, but equally fluent in the language of facts, action, and the sometimes ungentle pursuit of truth. Chapter 6: The Observatory of the Self, when reflection becomes the cage. We are taught that to know oneself is the highest virtue. We journal, we meditate, we go to therapy, we dissect our dreams and parse our motivations. This turning of the gaze inward, this construction of an inner observatory is framed as the ultimate act of freedom. But what happens when the observer never leaves the telescope? What happens when the act of watching your own life becomes so consuming that you forget to step outside and live it? This is the paradox of the hyper-reflective self. The very tools we built for liberation can forge the most subtle of prisons. We become curators of our own experience, so busy cataloging, analyzing, and interpreting each moment that the moment itself passes by, untouched. The feeling is not processed. It is pre-processed for later review. The conversation is not had. It is mentally recorded for subsequent analysis. This is consciousness turned back on itself in an endless loop, where life becomes raw material for the autobiographical project and spontaneity dies under the weight of its own potential meaning. The system of self-knowledge pushed to its extreme doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to a state of existential spectatorship, where you are both the lead actor and the only audience member in a play that never quite feels real because you're always watching yourself perform it. This condition is the logical endpoint of living within a therapeutic reality. If every feeling is data and every interaction is a dynamic to be understood, then the default mode of being becomes one of constant meta-commentary. The system rewards this. It praises self-awareness, mindfulness, and emotional intelligence. But there is a razor-thin line between being aware of your experience and being separate from it. Hyper-reflection creates a psychic distance, a layer of glass between you and the world. You don't get angry. You observe your anger rising. You don't fall in love. You analyze your attachment patterns as you experience feelings of affection. This glass protects you from the raw, sometimes overwhelming voltage of direct experience. But it also muffles it, colors it, and delays it. Joy becomes less joyful because part of you is already writing the memory of it. Grief becomes less grievous because a segment of your mind is noting, this is the 5 stages in action. The system, designed to help you integrate experience, can instead professionalize your relationship to it. You become the historian, biographer, and critic of your own life, always one step removed from the living of it. The goal is no longer to be, but to understand what it means to be a goal that is, by definition, never complete. For Ben, a writer and teacher, this wasn't a crisis, it was his identity. He had always been the observer, the one who could articulate what others merely felt. Therapy honed this into a superpower. He could deconstruct any emotional reaction, trace any pattern back to its origin. His friends called him wise. His students found his insights profound. He was the master of his inner world. But mastery has a shadow. Ben began to notice a strange hollowness at the center of his most profound experiences. He'd be on a beautiful hike, and instead of feeling awe, he'd be narrating to himself, "Notice how the light filters through the trees. This should feel peaceful. Why is my mind still buzzing? Am I truly present?" He'd have a deep conversation with a friend, and while listening, a part of him would be crafting the insightful reflection he would offer in response, already framing the exchange as a moment of connection for his mental archive. Even in moments of solitude, he was never alone. He was in the constant company of his own analytical commentary. I felt like I was living my life in parentheses, he said. The real action was always in the footnote, in the analysis. The kiss was never just a kiss. It was an example of my capacity for vulnerability or a data point in my relational healing. I was so busy being the author of my story that I forgot I was also supposed to be the character, just feeling things. The breaking point was absurdly small. He burned a piece of toast. As he stood scraping the blackened crumbs into the sink, the familiar narrator kicked in. Frustration, minor failure. Notice the impatience in your body. This relates to your fear of wasting time, which stems from, and in that moment, he was overcome not with frustration, but with a profound, weary sadness. He couldn't even burn toast without turning it into a seminar. The Observatory had become a panopticon, and he was both the warden and the inmate, sentenced to a lifetime of watching himself. Ben's story reveals the tyranny of the inner witness. When reflection becomes our primary mode of engagement, we risk sacrificing immediacy on the altar of understanding. We trade the hot, messy, unrehearsed present for the cool, ordered, sterile past of memory and analysis. Creativity suffers as every nascent idea is dissected before it can fully form. Intimacy suffers as real connection requires dropping the observer and meeting another person in unscripted, unanalyzed presence. We become connoisseurs of our own experience but paupers in actual lived reality. The system of self-awareness, untethered, doesn't lead to enlightenment. It leads to a kind of emotional dissociation, where you are forever preparing a report on the storm instead of feeling the rain on your skin. So, how do you silence the perpetual narrator without becoming thoughtless or unreflective? The answer is not to stop thinking, but to cultivate periods of conscious non-observation. It is to practice stepping out of the observatory and into the wilderness of direct experience without a notebook. Begin with a practice of sensory anchoring. Choose one routine, meaningless activity each day: washing dishes, taking a shower, walking to your car. For the duration of that activity, your sole task is to kidnap your attention from your thoughts and imprison it in your senses. Feel the temperature of the water, the texture of the plate. Hear the sound of the spray. See the light catching the bubbles. When the narrator starts up, "This is a mindfulness exercise. I'm focusing on the water. This is good for me." Gently but firmly redirect. Just the water, just the sound, just the feeling. You are not trying to achieve a state of blankness. You are trying to achieve a state of suchness where the experience is just itself, not a symbol of anything, not a lesson, not a story. It's just dishes. Then, introduce designated reflection time. This is the crucial counterpart. If your mind is a brilliant, relentless analyst, don't try to shut it down all day. That's a war you'll lose. Instead, give it a job and a time clock. Schedule 20 minutes in the evening as analysis time. Sit with your journal. Let the narrator run wild. Deconstruct the day. Trace the patterns. Write the insights. Draft the internal seminar. But when the time is up, close the notebook. When an analytical thought arises outside of that time, you can politely acknowledge it. Noted. We'll discuss that in the analysis meeting at 8 p.m. You are compartmentalizing the observer, putting it to work for you, rather than letting it run the show 24/7. Finally, seek unanalyzable experiences. Engage in activities that defy the narrator by their sheer physicality or absurdity. Something where thinking about it is useless. Rock climbing, where your mind must go quiet and your body must simply do. Dancing to loud music, where the goal is to lose yourself in the rhythm, not to look graceful. A cold plunge, playing with a child or a dog. In these spaces, the observer is useless baggage. The goal is to be so immersed in the doing that the voice of commentary is drowned out by the sheer volume of sensation and action. You are reminding yourself that you are not just a consciousness that has a body, you are a body that sometimes has consciousness. And that body knows how to live without a single footnote. The path forward is not to dismantle the observatory you've painstakingly built. It is to build a door and give yourself permission to walk out of it. True self-knowledge isn't found in the perpetual watching. It's found in the courageous moments when you stop watching altogether, step into the messy, unscripted flow of life, and trust that you will understand it later, if understanding is even required. Sometimes, a kiss is just a kiss. Sometimes, burned toast is just burned toast, and in that simple, unadorned isness, lies a freedom more profound than any insight the observer could ever provide. Chapter 7. The Unmapped Territory, when the system has no name. Every system, no matter how comprehensive, has its edge a point where its maps turn to blank parchment and its compass spins uselessly. The therapeutic system, with its intricate lexicons and diagnostic manuals, is no exception. It excels at pathologizing definable suffering, depression with its chemical shadows, anxiety with its frantic loops, trauma with its frozen memories. But what of the suffering that refuses these categories? The ache that is not a disorder but a dislocation, the dread that is not a symptom but a signal, the grief that is not for a person but for a lost potential, a road not taken, a version of yourself that quietly vanished one day without a funeral? This is the unmapped territory of human experience. It is the profound loneliness that can exist in a happy marriage, the existential vertigo that strikes on a perfect Tuesday afternoon, the quiet despair of a life that is objectively good but subjectively thin. The therapeutic system, when faced with this, often does one of two things. It frantically tries to force it onto an existing map. This sounds like dysthymia, or it subtly pathologizes the search itself. Your need for a deeper meaning might be a form of spiritual bypassing. In doing so, it can commit a peculiar violence. The violence of telling you that your most ineffable, wordless pains are, in fact, just another puzzle to be solved with the tools you've already exhausted. But some silences are not meant to be filled with analysis. Some darknesses are not pathologies. They are the natural shadows cast by being a conscious creature under a vast and indifferent sky. This territory exists because the therapeutic framework is, at its core, a system for reducing suffering and increasing functionality. It is an engineering model for the psyche. But what if some forms of suffering are not engineering problems? What if they are existential, philosophical, or even spiritual data? The pain of mortality, the question of purpose, the confrontation with absolute freedom and its terrifying responsibility, these are not malfunctions. They are the baseline condition of aware human life. To treat them as bugs is to misunderstand the entire software. The system struggles here because its goal is to make the pain stop. But the pain of a meaningless job won't stop with cognitive restructuring. It might only stop when you quit. The ache of a creative spirit unused won't subside with anti-anxiety medication. It might only subside when you finally pick up the brush. The system can help you manage the fear of quitting or the self-doubt in painting, but it cannot and was never designed to answer the foundational question, what is my life for? When we demand that it do so, we turn therapy from a tool into a secular religion, and our therapists into frustrated priests armed with worksheets instead of scripture. This collision with the unmapped is often preceded by a strange hollow victory. You've done the work. The old traumas are integrated, the anxiety is managed, the relationships are healthy. And yet, a quiet, persistent question remains, like a faint, discordant hum underneath the music of your improved life. This was where Anya found herself. A former lawyer who had successfully used therapy to escape a draining career and a suffocating marriage, she had rebuilt her life with intention. She had a peaceful cottage, a fulfilling freelance practice, a close circle of friends. She meditated. She journaled. She was, by all therapeutic metrics, healed and thriving, and she was profoundly, unspeakably sad. It wasn't a depressive sadness, she explained, her voice calm and clear. It wasn't heaviness or fatigue. It was more like a haunting, a sense that I had followed the recipe for a good life perfectly, but I was tasting nothing. The sadness felt like homesickness, but for a home I'd never seen. She went back to her therapist, a wise and kind woman who had guided her through her divorce. They explored whether this was anhedonia, a residual of past depression. They looked for covert anxiety. They examined her sleep and diet. The tools that had once unlocked so much now felt like trying to pick a lock with a banana. The therapist finally said, gently, "Anya, I hear a deep existential pain. I can help you hold it, but I don't think I can fix it. This isn't a broken part. This might be a calling." That sentence, This might be a calling opened a door out of the system. It suggested her pain wasn't an error to be corrected, but a signal to be followed. Anya began to look for languages other than the therapeutic. She read existential philosophers who spoke of anguish and absurdity. She immersed herself in poetry that gave form to formless longing. She took long, silent walks with no goal but to be bored, hoping the emptiness would speak. Slowly, she began to understand her sadness not as a symptom of something wrong, but as a testament to something alive and hungry within her that the curated, healthy life could not nourish. It was the part of her that needed myth, risk, creation, and a connection to something larger than her own self-improvement. Her pain wasn't a sign the system had failed, it was a sign she had outgrown its jurisdiction. Anya's journey illuminates a critical truth. The therapeutic system is a magnificent tool for repairing the broken foundations of a house. But it is not an architect. It cannot design the soaring cathedral. You might feel called to build on that repaired foundation. Its language is one of deficit and repair. It has no vocabulary for aspiration, for transcendence, for the sacred, for the kind of pain that is not an illness but a growing pain of the soul. So, how do you navigate when you find yourself in this unmapped territory, when the familiar tools only make you feel more lost? The first step is to recognize the border. You might be at the edge of the map if your pain is persistent but defies clear labels. I just feel a deep, wordless wrongness. Standard coping mechanisms feel trivial or insulting. You have a sense that your suffering is connected not to your past, but to your future, to a life you are not living. The question, "What's wrong with me?" has morphed into, "What is this for?" When this happens, the action is not to try harder within the system. It is to consciously seek other maps. Begin an experiment in intellectual and experiential tourism. For 1 month, deliberately seek wisdom from fields that are not psychology. Read existential philosophy, Camus, Kierkegaard, Sartre, not for answers, but to find companions in the question. Engage with great art, music, or poetry. Don't analyze it. Let it act upon you. See what resonates with your unnamed feeling. Explore nature with a different intent, not for mindfulness or exercise, but to feel your smallness. Sit by an ocean or under a vast sky and let it put your human worries in a cosmic perspective. Talk to people who operate in different frameworks, a spiritual leader, an artist, a master craftsman, an elder. Ask them not about feelings, but about purpose, craft, devotion, legacy. Your task is not to find a new system to submit to, but to collect fragments of other languages. You are trying to find words for what psychology has no words for. Finally, practice respectful disobedience. When the therapeutic voice in your head insists on pathologizing your existential ache, this is just your avoidance pattern, you can politely disagree. You can say to yourself, "Thank you for your concern, but I am choosing to treat this not as a symptom, but as a guide. I am going to follow this feeling of emptiness and see where it leads, even if it leads me away from what I've been told is healthy." This is the courage of the unmapped territory. To trust the authenticity of your own unexplainable experience over the comfort of a pre-existing diagnosis. The journey through this land does not end with a new, better label. It may end with a radical action, a creative burst, a spiritual commitment, or simply a hard-won peace with the mystery itself. The goal is not to conquer the territory, but to learn to inhabit its uncertainties with a new kind of courage, the courage to be unanswered, to be unoptimized, and to accept that the deepest layers of a human life may always be, beautifully, tragically, beyond the reach of any system's final analysis. Chapter 8. The Patchwork Philosophy, Building a Personal System After the Blueprint Fails. There comes a point in the journey of self-examination when the prefabricated systems begin to show their seams. You have the therapeutic map with its labeled territories of trauma and its highways to coping. You have the productivity map, charting the peaks of efficiency. You have the spiritual map, pointing toward enlightenment. But you stand at a personal coordinate that exists on none of them, or perhaps at the chaotic intersection of all three. This is the moment of system collapse, not a breakdown, but a quiet realization that no single purchased blueprint can contain the peculiar architecture of your one life. What emerges from this realization is not chaos, but a necessary creative act, the assembly of a patchwork philosophy. This is not an academic pursuit, it is a survival craft. It is the slow, intuitive process of taking threads from therapy, scraps from philosophy, swatches of art, fragments of scientific insight, and pieces of forgotten spiritual traditions, and stitching them into a rough, personal, and ever-evolving canopy of meaning. It is acknowledging that you are too complex for any one doctrine, and that your ultimate responsibility is not to any external system's purity, but to the integrity of your own makeshift hybrid understanding. The goal is not consistency, but coherence, a private sense that your beliefs, however eclectic, form a net strong enough to catch you when you fall, and wide enough to help you make sense of the falling stars of your experience. This patchwork process is the antithesis of dogma. While systems thrive on internal consistency and clear hierarchies of value, a patchwork philosophy embraces productive contradiction. It might hold the therapeutic idea that your feelings are valid alongside the Stoic principle that your feelings are not commands. It might weave the Buddhist concept of non-attachment with the passionate, committed love of a romantic poet. To a purist, this is heresy. To the individual living a real life, it is often the only way forward. The system-administered identity, the survivor, the stoic, the seeker, breaks down under the weight of lived contradictions. You are not just a survivor. You are also someone who wants to move beyond that story. You are not just practicing non-attachment. You are also fiercely attached to your child. The patchwork allows you to hold these opposing truths without one having to cancel the other out. It moves you from being a consumer of meaning to a curator and creator of it. You are no longer just following a path. You are breaking trail, and your toolkit is assembled from whatever you've found useful along the way. This is the ultimate act of agency within a world of competing systems, to declare that your inner authority will be the final judge of what works, what rings true, and what gets to stay in the patchwork. For Leo, the path to his patchwork began with exhaustion. He had been a diligent student of several systems. He had a bookshelf section for cognitive behavioral therapy workbooks, another for Zen Buddhism, a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and a notes app filled with insights from productivity gurus. He would apply each system with fervor until its limitations chafed. CBT helped him manage anxiety, but felt sterile when faced with profound grief. Zen offered peace, but seemed to ask for a detachment from ambition he couldn't muster. Stoicism gave him resilience, but sometimes veered into emotional numbness. He was constantly switching operating systems, and the reboots were draining him. The turning point came during a period of creative failure. A project he'd poured 2 years into collapsed. The emotional fallout was a tangled knot no single system could untie. Grief, shame, professional anxiety, and a crushing sense of meaninglessness swirled together. His CBT worksheet asked him to identify the cognitive distortion. His Stoic journal prompted him to remember this as an external indifferent. His meditation app suggested he observe the feelings without judgment. Each felt like a partial truth. But applying anyone felt like trying to cover a wild, multi-headed beast with a single, perfectly sized but inadequate blanket. One sleepless night, in a state of raw defeat, he didn't reach for a book or a protocol. He opened a blank document and just started writing. He didn't write a journal entry. He began writing a letter to himself, but also to the universe. In it, he found himself quoting a line from a favorite novel about enduring failure. Then he recalled a principle from physics about entropy and order. He remembered his grandmother's simple, untherapized saying about weathering storms. He cited a psychologist on post-traumatic growth, then contradicted her with a poet's take on the nobility of pure, unanswered sorrow. He wasn't arguing for any one position. He was building a council. He was letting all the voices, the therapist, the philosopher, the novelist, the grandmother, the physicist, speak to his specific, multifaceted pain. For the first time, he wasn't trying to force his experience into a system. He was building a system, however messy, around his experience. That document didn't solve my pain, Leo said. But it held it. It made it feel witnessed in all its complexity. I realized I didn't need one perfect answer. I needed a chorus of perspectives. My job wasn't to choose the right one, but to conduct them. From that point, his practice changed. He stopped trying to be a good Stoic or a good Buddhist. He began maintaining what he called his commonplace book of meaning, a physical notebook where he collected quotes, ideas, and observations from anywhere that resonated, without regard for their disciplinary origin. Next to a passage from a trauma researcher, he might glue a photo of a mountain range. Next to a line from a bleak philosopher, he might write a joyful lyric from a pop song. The juxtapositions were the point. They were exercises in holding multiplicity. Leo's journey out of systemic purity into a personal patchwork highlights a crucial evolution, from adherence to integration. The initial phase of self-work often involves surrendering to a system to gain stability. The next phase involves realizing that no system is total. The final, ongoing phase is the artistic, intellectual, and spiritual work of synthesis. Your patchwork philosophy becomes your true inner compass, not because it always points north, but because you assembled it yourself from the fragments you found true. And therefore you trust it in a way you could never fully trust a borrowed, pre-assembled one. So, how do you begin the conscious, deliberate work of building your patchwork when all you know are the ready-made tents of established systems? The process is less about studying and more about responsive collecting. Start by creating a meaning commons. This is a single, dedicated repository, a notebook, a digital document, a notes app folder, even a physical box. Its sole purpose is to hold fragments that resonate with you, with zero concern for where they come from or how they fit together. For 1 month, your only task is to be a magpie of meaning. Collect. A sentence from a novel that hit you in the chest. A quote from a philosopher that clarified a confusion. A line from a song that names a feeling you couldn't. An observation from a scientist about the natural world that fills you with awe. A silly, profound thing a child said. A memory of a moment you felt deep peace, described in your own words. A principle from therapy that actually worked. A spiritual idea you don't fully believe but find beautiful. Do not organize. Do not categorize. Just collect. The act of collection shifts you from a passive consumer of packaged worldviews to an active hunter-gatherer of personal truth. Once you have a collection, practice deliberate juxtaposition. Once a week, open your commons and randomly select 2 or 3 fragments. Write them at the top of a page. Then, write for 10 minutes on the conversation between them. How does the song lyric comment on the philosophical quote? How does the memory of peace challenge or affirm the therapy principle? You are not looking for a synthesis. You are practicing the skill of letting different, sometimes conflicting voices speak to each other in the space of your own mind. This is the loom where the patchwork is woven. Finally, field test your patches. When faced with a life challenge, a conflict, a loss, a decision, consciously consult your patchwork instead of defaulting to a single system. Ask yourself, what might my collection of fragments have to say about this? Maybe the Stoic quote gives you strength to act, while the novel excerpt gives you compassion for the other person's fragility. Maybe the scientific observation helps you zoom out and see the insignificance of the problem, while the child's saying reminds you of a simple joy worth protecting. Your action becomes a unique blend, informed by your curated wisdom. The patchwork philosophy is never finished. It is a living document, a work in progress that grows, sheds old pieces, and incorporates new ones as you do. It accepts that you are a changing creature in a complex world, and that a single, rigid map will always fail you. But in that acceptance lies a profound freedom. You are no longer a tourist in someone else's territory, anxiously checking their guidebook. You have become a cartographer of your own soul, drawing a map whose legend is written in the language of your own lived, collected, and stitched together truth. The seams may show, the patterns may clash, but it will be uniquely, authentically, and resiliently yours. Chapter 9. The World Beyond the Frame. When no system can hold you. There is an unspoken promise embedded in every system of understanding that with enough study, enough practice, enough correct application, the world will finally make sense. The therapeutic system promises that with enough introspection, your inner chaos will resolve into narrative. The philosophical system promises that with enough logic, life's paradoxes will yield to truth. The productivity system promises that with enough optimization, your days will accumulate into a legacy. We build these frames and place our experiences within them, and for a time, the world feels ordered, legible, manageable. But life, in its raw, uncensored flow, has a way of overflowing the edges of even the most carefully constructed frame. There are events, a sudden, meaningless loss, a moment of transcendent, wordless beauty, a love that defies all your patterns, a despair that laughs in the face of your coping strategies that do not just challenge the system, they shatter it. They are experiences of such sheer, unprocessed isness that they cannot be contained by diagnosis, philosophy, or protocol. This is the moment you come face to face with the world beyond the frame. It is terrifying because it strips you of your primary tool for navigating reality, your ability to explain it. But it is also the most profoundly alive you will ever be, because you are meeting existence not through a filter of concepts, but directly, in all its devastating and magnificent mystery. To encounter this is to realize that every system, no matter how wise, is a translation. And some things cannot be translated, they can only be lived. This territory beyond the frame is not a failure of understanding. It is the frontier of understanding. Systems function by reduction. They take the infinite complexity of a moment, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the specific ache in a parent's voice, the kaleidoscope of light through a stained glass window, and reduce it to a category. A sensory experience, a relational dynamic, an aesthetic pleasure. This reduction is necessary for thought, for communication, for sanity, but it is also a kind of loss. The map is never the territory. The grief you feel at a funeral is not captured by the Kubler-Ross model. The awe you feel holding your newborn child is not contained in the hormonal analysis of oxytocin release. The systems give us handles for the thing, but the thing itself always slips through our fingers. To live exclusively within the frame is to live in a world of handles, never touching the vessel. The moment you touch the vessel, the raw, unmediated reality, the handle becomes irrelevant. This is why the most profound experiences often leave us speechless. Language, the ultimate system, fails. We are left with silence, tears, laughter, or a quiet that hums with a meaning we can feel in our bones but cannot articulate. This is not a deficit in us. It is a testament to the fact that we have brushed against something larger than the container of our own cognition. For Jacob, a man who had built his identity on being able to explain, this confrontation came not through crisis, but through grace. A historian by trade and a stoic by private practice, Jacob's life was an exercise in framing. He understood events through cause and effect. He managed emotions through premeditation of adversity. His world was orderly, rational, and comfortably distant. He observed life through the thick glass of analysis. It happened on an utterly ordinary Thursday. He was walking home through the park, mentally drafting a lecture, when he passed a young father teaching his small daughter to ride a bike. The scene was a cliché. But as Jacob watched, the girl wobbled, pedaled twice on her own, and her father let go. For 3 glorious wobbly seconds, she rode. Her face transformed from tense concentration to pure, unadulterated shock, then erupted into a grin of such triumphant, radiant joy that it seemed to generate its own light. The father whooped, a sound of pure, unfiltered pride. And Jacob stopped. He didn't just see it. He was, for a split second, inside it. He wasn't Jacob the historian analyzing a social ritual. He wasn't Jacob the stoic noting a preferred indifferent. He was, viscerally, the child feeling the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of balance for the first time. He was also the father, feeling the heart-bursting love of witnessing a tiny, hard-won victory. The emotion hit him not as a thought, but as a physical wave, a tightening in his throat, a stinging in his eyes. It was joy, but a joy so laced with the fragility of the moment, with the ache of time passing, with the sheer blinding beauty of human effort and love, that it had no name. His internal system scrambled to frame it. This is a mirror neuron response. This is an example of intrinsic motivation. This is a moment of flow. Each thought felt like a desperate, feeble cartoon trying to describe a symphony. The thoughts didn't diminish the experience. They just buzzed meaninglessly beside it, like a fly against a window pane. The experience itself was sovereign. It simply was. He stood there, on the path, tears now streaming freely down his face, feeling more connected to life and more shattered in his understanding of it than he ever had. The frames of history and philosophy, which had always held the world at a safe, comprehensible distance, had vaporized. For the first time, he was not looking at life through a frame. He was standing in the painting. "I walked home in a daze," Jacob said later. The world looked the same, but it was utterly different. The colors were sharper, sounds were clearer. It was as if I had been living in a beautifully annotated copy of a book, and suddenly I was thrust into the real world the book was only trying to describe. And the real world was louder, messier, more painful, and more breathtakingly beautiful than any description could ever capture. His carefully curated inner citadel of reason hadn't been stormed. It had been rendered transparent. And he saw that the universe outside was infinitely vaster. He hadn't lost his mind. He had, for a moment, touched a reality that made the mind seem like a small, brightly lit room in an endless, star-filled night. Jacob's story illustrates the liberation that lies on the other side of systemic collapse. The frames, therapy, philosophy, ideology are not enemies. They are tools, shelters, training wheels. But their ultimate purpose is not to be clung to forever. Their purpose is to stabilize us until we are strong enough, brave enough, to occasionally step outside and bear the direct gaze of the unframed world. This is not about abandoning understanding for dumb sensation. It is about recognizing that the deepest understanding is often non-conceptual. It is felt, not thought. The system can point to the door, but you have to walk through it alone, into the weather. So, how do you cultivate a relationship with the world beyond the frame without losing your grounding in the world of useful frames? The practice is one of conscious toggling, learning to turn the analytic faculty off, not permanently, but intentionally. Begin with a practice of dedicated receiving. Choose one sense for a week. Say, hearing. For 15 minutes a day, go somewhere you can sit safely. Close your eyes. Your only task is to listen. But here is the crucial rule. You are forbidden from labeling, identifying, or analyzing the sounds. Do not think, "That's a car," or "That's a bird singing a mating call," or "That's an air conditioner." Your mind will desperately want to do this. When it does, gently return your focus to the raw sensation of the sound itself. Not the source, but the sound, its pitch, its texture, its volume, its duration, how it fades. You are practicing the art of pure perception before the brain rushes in with its frame of what that is. You are listening to the symphony of the world before it's sorted into instruments. Then, create frameless moments in your daily routine. These are small, intentional actions where you forbid yourself from turning the experience into material for your internal systems. Drink a glass of cold water. Feel the temperature, the liquid moving down your throat, the sensation of quenching. Do not think, "This is hydration," or "I should be grateful for clean water." Just drink it. Pet your dog. Feel the texture of the fur, the warmth of the body, the rhythm of the breath. Do not think, "This is reducing my cortisol," or "Dogs are so loyal." Just be with the animal. You are carving out tiny sanctuaries of direct experience in the cathedral of your analytical mind. Finally, when you encounter a moment of overwhelming beauty, pain, or awe, practice surrendering the narrative. When the mind races to frame it, "This is the happiest I've ever been. This grief will destroy me. This is spiritual," consciously interrupt it. Silently say to yourself, "Not now, just this." Let the emotion wash over you without the voiceover. Let the event be immense and unexplained. Trust that you do not need to understand it in the moment to be fully present for it. You can analyze it later if you must, but give yourself the gift of first experiencing it as the animal you are, not the analyst you've trained yourself to be. Living in the tension between the frame and the unframed is the work of a mature consciousness. The frames give us community, language, and tools to repair ourselves. The unframed world gives us reality, in all its terrifying and magnificent immediacy. Your wholeness does not depend on choosing one over the other, but on developing the wisdom to know when you need the shelter of the frame and the courage to occasionally step outside, look up at the silent, starry vastness, and remember that you are, and will always be, a small, wondrous part of something that can never be fully captured in any system's net. That is not a thought, it is a homecoming. Chapter 10. The Unsystematic Wisdom, the quiet voice beneath all theories. After the deconstruction of borrowed systems, after the assembly of a personal patchwork, after the terrifying and beautiful encounters with the unframed world, a question remains. What is left? What endures when you have examined every belief, challenged every assumption, and felt the artificial walls of your understanding dissolve? What you find is not another, better system. You find something smaller, quieter, and more fundamental, a capacity. It is the capacity to sit with not knowing, to hold conflicting truths without immediate resolution, to act from a place of intuitive alignment that feels deeper than reason. This is not enlightenment. It is something more humble and more usable, unsystematic wisdom. It is the slow sedimentation of all your failures with systems, all your encounters with the unmappable, all the times your patchwork philosophy held and the times it tore. It is not a set of principles you can quote. It is a stance, a way of inhabiting questions. It knows that the mind craves systems, but the life is lived in the exceptions. Its primary evidence is a feeling in the body, a quiet yes, a resonant no, a sense of rightness that appears not as a thunderclap of certainty, but as a settling, like sand finding its level in water. This wisdom uses systems as one might use a set of keys, trying each in a lock, but knows that the true opening often comes not from the key, but from a gentle, knowing touch on the door itself. This wisdom is born from the repeated experience of systemic failure. You learn that therapy is brilliant for healing wounds, but silent on the question of what to build in the healed space. You learn that philosophy is magnificent for clarifying thought, but impotent in the face of a child's fever in the night. You learn that productivity systems optimize tasks, but cannot tell you which tasks are worthy of a human life. Each system, when pushed to its limit, points beyond itself. Unsystematic wisdom is what grows in the fertile ground of those limitations. It is the part of you that learns to consult the therapeutic map, the philosophical compass, and the productivity checklist, and then, after considering them all, looks out at the actual terrain, feels the wind on your skin, and chooses a path for reasons you cannot fully articulate to a committee of your own thoughts. It is the reintegration of intuition after a long exile in the land of analysis. It is not anti-intellectual, it is meta-intellectual. It is the intelligence that decides when to think and when to stop thinking and what to do in the generous, action-filled silence that follows. This final stage feels less like an achievement and more like a homecoming to a simpler, more ancient self. The cacophony of internal advisors, the therapist, the philosopher, the guru, the coach, doesn't vanish, but it loses its urgent, conflicting authority. They become a council you can consult, but you are no longer a junior member pleading your case. You have become the head of the table, listening patiently, then making a decision that takes their counsel into account but is not bound by it. Your primary relationship is no longer with any of their systems, but with the quiet, observing consciousness that can hear them all without being owned by any. For Clara, whose journey began with the rigid scripts of therapeutic friendship and led through the sterility of a psychologically safe but inert workplace, this wisdom arrived as a profound simplification. After years of analyzing every motive, auditing every interaction for fairness, and managing her own and others' emotional states, she was exhausted by the bureaucracy of her own inner life. The shift didn't come from a new insight, but from a kind of compassionate exhaustion. One evening, after a long day of navigating office politics framed as relational dynamics, she received a phone call. An old aunt, not a close one, was dying. The family asked if Clara could help sort through her apartment. Without thinking, she said yes. The next weekend, she found herself in a small, cluttered home filled with the quiet dust of a long life. There were no frameworks here. No one was worried about boundaries or triggers. There was just a life, reduced to objects, teacups, photographs of unknown people, half-knitted scarves, paid bills bundled with rubber bands. As she gently packed these things, a deep quiet settled over her. The constant hum of self-referential thought. How am I feeling about this? What does this say about me? Am I doing this right? Just stopped. There was only the task, honoring a life by tending to its residue. In that silence, something else became audible. It was a wordless sense of poignancy and care, a direct line of feeling from her heart to the delicate china in her hands. She wasn't analyzing her grief, she was simply being grief and care and respect in action. Driving home, she realized the difference. For years, her interior world had been a boardroom. Now, it felt like a clean, quiet kitchen. The boardroom was for strategizing and managing. The kitchen was for making nourishment from whatever ingredients were at hand. The boardroom asked, "What is the optimal decision based on our principles?" The kitchen asked, "What is needed here now?" The answer in the kitchen was always simpler, more concrete and more human. Make soup, sit with her, listen, pack the teacups with care. Unsystematic wisdom, Clara realized, isn't about knowing more, it's about needing to know less. It's the understanding that most of the time the next right thing is embarrassingly obvious. Feed the hungry person. Finish the task you promised. Rest when you're tired. Speak the kind truth. The monumental effort of all those systems was often just a complicated way to avoid these simple, terrifyingly direct actions. Clara's epiphany reveals the core of this wisdom. It is action-oriented, context, sensitive, and humble. It bypasses the infinite regress of self-analysis. Why do I want to help? Is this a codependent pattern? And lands on the deed itself. She needs help, I will help. It trusts that the meaning is in the action, not in the preface to the action. This is the wisdom that emerges when you finally stop trying to think your way into a good life and start noticing that a good life is built by a series of good, small, tangible actions chosen again and again from a place of quiet discernment. So, how do you cultivate this unsystematic wisdom after being so systematic for so long? You don't cultivate it like a skill. You create the conditions for it to speak, and then you practice listening and obeying. Start with a practice of micro-surrenders. Once a day, identify one tiny decision you would normally agonize over: what to have for lunch, whether to send an email now or later, which task to do first. Instead of analyzing pros and cons, consulting a productivity method, or asking how you feel about it, do this. Pause for 10 seconds. Breathe. Then, ask this simple, almost silly question. What is the obvious thing? Not the optimal thing, the strategic thing, or the most therapeutic thing. The obvious thing. Then, do that. The obvious thing for lunch might be the apple because you see it. The obvious next task might be the one with the nearest deadline. The wisdom is in trusting the simplicity of the signal and following it without layering on commentary. You are training yourself to bypass the committee meeting in your head for minor agenda items. Then develop a physical barometer. Unsystematic wisdom often speaks first through the body, not the mind. It's a gut feeling, a tightening in the chest, a feeling of expansion or contraction. For a week, before making any low to medium stakes decision, pause and scan your body. Don't ask, "What do I think?" Ask, "How does my body feel about this option?" Imagine saying yes to the invitation. Do you feel lighter? Do you feel a dread-heavy sensation? Your mind can rationalize anything. Your body's intelligence is often simpler and more honest. This isn't about magical thinking. It's about reintegrating somatic intuition as a valid data point in your decision-making matrix, one that has been silenced by an over-reliance on cognitive systems. Finally, and most importantly, practice ordinary, unanalyzed kindness. Wisdom crystallizes in action, especially action taken for others. Once a day, perform a small, secret act of kindness that is so simple it requires no systemic justification. Pay for the coffee of the person behind you. Leave a genuine compliment for a colleague. Listen to a friend without once thinking about what you'll say next. The rule is, you are forbidden from turning this act into a story about your own character. I'm such a good person. A therapeutic exercise. This is good for my empathy. Or a spiritual practice. This is my karma for the day. The act must be its own end. In that direct, unmediated movement, from noticing a need to meeting it, you strengthen the muscle of unsystematic wisdom. You are practicing the art of responding to life directly, without the filter of a personal narrative. The journey that began with learning the complex vocabulary of your pain ends with the rediscovery of a simple, pre-verbal grammar of being. You will still use the systems. You will still have your patchwork philosophy, but they will become what they were always meant to be, a library in your house, not the walls of it. The quiet voice of unsystematic wisdom is the one that lives in the house, that walks out into the garden, that feels the sun and knows, without needing to say it, that this the feeling of the light, the tending of the soil, the sharing of the harvest is the point, not the library's catalog of the light itself. And in that knowing, you are finally, fully, and quietly at home. Thank you for listening to the end. Please share your opinion in the comments.